There we go. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our program this evening. I'm Brian Breitholtz. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Alumni Relations, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. Some of you might know prior to COVID, almost all of our programming was live and in person, and COVID opened the way for us to learn this Zoom technology. So please bear with us as we continue to learn as we go along as well. But interestingly, we have expanded our reach pretty significantly with this Zoom programming. So tonight, for example, we have over 100 participants, and not only are they from Northeast Ohio and Ohio in general, but we have 14 states represented in 2 countries. So we're very pleased. We have a real treat for you tonight with Dr. Horowitz, but before I begin with his introduction, I'm going to pass it back to Anthony Fosicek, who is our Director of Communications and Marketing for the Division of Advancement, to go over some of the basics of this platform for you and some of the logistics of tonight's program. Anthony?
Thank you very much. First of all, tonight's presentation is being recorded. If for some reason you have to drop out early or if you have technical issues, it will be available online in a couple of days at csualumni.com. Your microphones and your video are both muted or off. That is by default. It's part of the Zoom platform webinar feature that allows us to bring in more folks as opposed to having those smaller, more intimate rooms that you might be used to where you see a lot of your friends and folks are coughing in the background and interrupting. So we're gonna have no interruptions tonight, hopefully. If you have a question during the presentation, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the seminar. But if you wanna ask it while you're thinking of it, that's probably the best way to go. Down in your bar here, you'll see a Q&A button. Go ahead and fire your Q&A. If you have something that's kind of urgent, you want to send a chat, you can send it to the hosts in the chat feature. Or if at the end you want to raise your hand, if you have something that's kind of pressing and you're not quite sure how to frame it, raise your hand and I'll try to reach out to you directly by chat and we can have that addressed. You know, if you're having a technical issue, you can't quite hear, if you think there's something going on, just let us know. So last thing, always be sure to check it back at csualumni.com, where we'll continue to be posting updates to all of our events throughout the summer. Of course, everything is off campus and happening remotely, but we look forward to seeing you no matter where you are and welcome you back to Cleveland State this summer. So with that, I'll pass it back to Brian.
Great, thank you, Anthony. Dr. Ed Horowitz is an associate professor in our School of Communication. His research focuses on political socialization and how young adults learn about politics from their parents, schools, friends, and media. We have taken Dr. Horowitz with us a number of times to alumni events all over the country because he does such a great job and our alums always enjoy his presentations. But this evening is his first Zoom presentation for us. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Horowitz.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Thank you, Anthony. I'm really happy to be with everybody tonight. And I got a good, interesting presentation. We're going to talk a lot about the election and what's coming up and try and read the tea leaves of things at this early part of June. Things are still a long way off, so anything can change. So we're going to try and put that together, and I hope you'll find this to be an interesting presentation. So the title of the talk is In the Zoom-Filled Room, and that certainly can be, when I asked my children, when I said it's going to be called the Zoom-Filled Room, they were like, the Zoom-Filled Room, that's the room where it happens, because to them, that had an immediate connection to the musical Hamilton. Maybe some of you have seen it being played in either New York or Chicago when it was here in Cleveland. It's supposed to be coming back to Cleveland. I'm not sure if that will happen. Who knows how things will go. And of course, there's a famous song about the room where it happens.
I want to be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens. I want to be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens. I want to be in the room where it happens. I want to be in the room
the famous Leslie Odom Jr. here in this theme playing Aaron Burr and Lin-Manuel's musical, and he is of course upset because Alexander Hamilton has had a meeting with Thomas Jefferson and James Madison plotting about a trade between the three of them, where Alexander Hamilton would get his legislation for the federal banking system and the capital would move to Washington, D.C. So that is in the story. Great show. So if you have Disney Plus, by the way, it is coming to you on July 3rd, right before Independence Day. So a great way to celebrate Independence Day by watching Hamilton on Disney Plus. So, of course, what I was thinking about more when I said the Zoom-filled room was the smoke-filled room. The smoke-filled room is an analogy to way back in the turn of the century or Tammany Hall or other periods like that where we would call them the fat cats. The fat cats in the smoke-filled room would sit behind closed doors and make the decisions about who the vice presidential candidate would be, who the presidential candidate, and other types of things behind closed doors away from the public. And that is what I was sort of making an allusion to, the fact that we're doing the Zoom presentation in the smoke-filled room, which you could say sometimes things still go on that way. But that's for perhaps another night, or ask a question after. So let's go back and let's talk about where we started, and we're going to kind of flip forward to get to the point of where we are. So going back to June 2015, we had what many have called the golden escalator ride down Trump Tower, coming down the escalator to make his announcement of becoming president, leading to President Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton, only by 3 percentage points, but by plenty enough in the Electoral College. And I always feel bad for poor Barron in this picture. He just looked very sad and quite. That was one of the last times that we were sort of allowed to see him on TV. Ivanka has really kept him. I'm sorry, Melania. Melania has really kept him quiet in the background. She does not want him to be photographed. There have been some issues with that going on. So this was one of the last times that Melania has let that happen. Okay, so the president got, of course, elected, and along these past 3.5 years, there have been some bumps along the way. I'll just highlight a few of them here. Certainly, Sean Spicer are making the case that this was the largest inauguration crowd ever. So even on that first day, things, at least with the media and certainly a segment of the public, did not go well. We certainly had everything that happened with the firing of James Comey. We certainly had lots of contention between President Trump and Senator John McCain, and John McCain certainly ended to be one of his greatest thorns in his side when he gave the famous thumbs down vote. He will not support the repeal of the Affordable Care Act in the way that the Republicans were doing it. And to this day, Republicans have never been able to come up with a replacement for that. So Senator McCain, certainly that was a bumpy part. And of course, the Mueller investigation and some of the characters that have been involved with that added to difficulties with President Trump. The family separation policy, children being separated from their parents as they crossed the border, led to many, many protests summer of 18. And so that, another kind of contentious problem. The protests in Charlottesville, of course, the young woman was killed, and leading to President Trump making the comment later in the Trump Tower that there are good people on both sides. The terrible loss during the 2018 midterm election as the Democrats take control of the House, and things really shifted the power balance quite a lot as Nancy Pelosi took power, and the Democrats launched their many, many investigations, including the impeachment trial. My daughter's cup, thank you. Things have not been going well with our foreign allies, certainly North Korea. There were some possibilities that things would go well. That sort of faded out. Iran, we're in a great big, lots of contentious issues going on with them, and certainly President Xi of China. That has also not gone well, especially with the coronavirus, so things are going there. Of course, becoming impeached. This was a stain that President Trump did not want, but he did become impeached, but of course acquitted in the Senate. But there's also been some accomplishments. So let's think about the things that President Trump could look back on and say, okay, this is what I have done. And this is what, going forward for the reelection, this is what I have. As often on Fox News, I haven't heard it recently, but certainly Sean Hannity would frequently list all these accomplishments of President Trump, and says that promises made, promises kept, promises made, promises kept. One of them certainly was reforming the tax structure. And so this was early in the president's in the first year, and this is all of the Republicans. He asked them all to come to, they all gathered together for this famous picture where the president did that. Of course, the actual substance of the tax code didn't really work out for middle class Americans, more for business class, for businesses, a lot of changes there, and for folks in the upper class, the upper echelon of the wealthy. So this was not something that either the Republicans could run on during the midterm, saying, because it just didn't help the middle class as much as had been promised, but it did pass through, and major changes to our tax law. One of the greatest changes that Trump has had on in the past few years has been into the judicial system. So Trump nominees that have been passed through the Senate, a lot of this has to do with Mitch McConnell, make up now 25% of all the judges in the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeal. So this is where things go, where they get appealed on the federal level, and more of these conservative judges are being appointed. He's appointed 50 judges on 13 U.S. Circuit courts, and President Obama only was able to appoint 55. President Trump has more. President Obama did it in 2 terms, 55. So this is 50 in only 3.5 years. So lots of opportunity to still have some change there. And of course, putting Neil Gorsuch and Judge Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh, on that. And of course, you remember the whole the contention with Judge Kavanaugh in the Senate with all of his confirmation. So that's an accomplishment. That's certainly something we could say. The First Step Act has been seen as an accomplishment for the president and the Republicans. This was signed into law in December 2018 after the midterm, which reduced mandatory sentencing for drug felonies. Again, this is federal law, not state law. And Matthew Charles was there at the State of the Union in 2019 to be recognized for this. So that was trying to certainly appeal to different demographics, to the African-American community and others. And there's also been accomplishments in foreign policy in terms of at least the killing of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi of ISIS, and mostly ISIS kind of being squashed down and losing their power by eliminating him. So that was great foreign policy and military accomplishment that was done. So we're not talking about ISIS anymore. That has changed. And certainly one of the accomplishments, at least before the coronavirus pandemic, has been the stock market. The stock market has risen dramatically. Certainly that is what President Trump has been touting, is the stock market and the great economy. So, so all that is in, you can look at these 2 graphs here. So the yellow, this one in the gray down here is showing Standard & Poor's and the NASDAQ, and you can sort of see everything sort of going up. It took a dip at the end of 2019 for a short time, and then really rallied back up and was really going gangbusters and until the coronavirus pandemic. You can see Trump versus the average here. So that has been an accomplishment. And so at the beginning of 2020, when people were thinking about what's really going to happen, this is as I was giving talks on getting ready for the Iowa caucuses and what the Democrats were doing and all the different candidates that they were fielding, Bernie versus, Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar and all these folks, Biden really in the background. Then Trump's odds were pretty high. Many people really saw him as being a formidable person to go after, and a lot of it had to do with the economy. So presidents, when the economy is going well, tend to get reelected despite other things that might be going on. So even though Democrats and liberals are sort of arguing, impeachment and this and everything going on with Ukraine and the Mueller investigation, although things with that didn't pan out, and all the other sort of daily things that sort of happened with President Trump, odds makers and political pundits were sort of saying, and I was sort of agreeing, that President Trump had an extremely good chance to be reelected. And even with recent polls, and we're going to get to the recent polls in a little bit, and the recent polls have shown that President Trump is declining in support. Where are people putting their money on right now? Any guesses? The answer is still Trump. So the money is on him. This is a great piece from Axios from May 11th. So even during the coronavirus pandemic, and what they found was in this story that that even though Biden was holding a sizable lead in national, oops, that's my fault. There we go. was even holding a sizable lead in national polls and even in some of the individual swing state polls. The money managers, people on Wall Street, were expecting Trump to retake the White House. And in another survey, this is done in late April, again, also during coronavirus, investors with at least $1 million of assets, 53% said they plan to vote for Biden, but 52% thought that Trump would win. So at least in terms of that, and that's sort of always an interesting predictor on how things are going to work, tends to be traditionally when a Democrat wins an election, stock market tends to go down right afterwards. When a Republican wins an election, stock market tends to go up. So if we're looking at that as an indicator, again, it's one of many, then this certainly is an interesting part of that story. But of course, things have really changed quite a bit since then. So this is a graph from, I think it's from ABC News, the month that coronavirus changed America, talking about those number of cases. And you can really see, of course, that ratcheting up. And certainly right around Memorial Day weekend, we crossed over the 100,000 death mark. So it's just, it's tragedy. It's a real tragedy. But how is this affecting the election? And now the betting odds are changed. So this is a piece from June 3rd. Biden blows past Trump in betting markets as protests over police brutality continued. He's starting to take a good lead. Now, you might not realize this, but this is a weird thing, but do a Google search and go election betting, and you will find there are many websites, many in the United States, some in the UK, Smarkets is in the UK, some in New Zealand, where you can actually put money down on these betting platforms if you want to get into betting on the presidential election. And a lot of people use these as sort of proxies for how people are really going to vote in the regular election. So they look at these because people are spending money. They're interested people. They're active in paying attention to the election. They're not just throwing their money away. And this is again seen as a proxy. So the markets were showing that Biden is just really taking over as things are going with the protest with George Floyd. And here's another piece. For the first time since mid-March, the odds for Joe Biden have surpassed, and he's the favorite to win. But of course, the most important thing to remember is it's early. It's very, very early, right? So don't jump to conclusions. It's easy to sort of think back, and I remember very well, right, back in the summer, Hillary Clinton had a very strong lead against Donald Trump, and they were talking about all these different states in play. Could Hillary Clinton win Texas, the very strong GOP red state of Texas? Could she win Utah? Let's going to make a play for Utah of all places. So it's very early. Slow down. Let's sort of put things into some more of these pieces of the puzzle together and see what we can come up with. Okay, I'll take a drink. So let's go over some of the events that have been happening during the coronavirus, and then we'll switch and see what is happening since. So here we have just a few headlines that I've pieced together of what's been going on, right? So we had President Trump coming out nearly every day for these White House briefings, which were just, people were home, people were quarantined, just getting tremendous ratings, just doing very, very well. President Trump, we know, loves the ratings. He pays quite a lot of attention to that, and he dominated these White House briefings, spoke more than his medical experts, and called himself the wartime president. So if you look down here at that piece, that picture from on the bottom, you can see President Trump, this is the rear view, speaking at these, you can see how this is during coronavirus, that in the White House press briefing room, all the correspondents are spread out with social distancing. And in the front is Jim Acosta from CNN. If you remember, very early on in the Trump administration, he was physically removed because of some questions that he was asking to President Trump. But of course, he came back. And of course, also in the picture is Anthony Fauci, and then the New York Times headline of how the deaths surpassed 100,000, as I mentioned before. And so President Trump's on TV every day. He's getting a lot of attention, good or bad, you could argue, but he's out there trying to speak positively about the, efforts to get the coronavirus under control. What's Joe Biden doing? So most people would say, I have no idea. I didn't hear anything about Joe Biden. And well, if you look at what Joe Biden did, he was struggling. He was really struggling. He had as this headline in the New York Times calls it, a cloistered campaign, walled off from the voters He developed a routine in his basement of trying to speak out and having these virtual town halls and a virtual campaign. But Biden it just always seemed flat. We're going to watch one of these in a bit. And you can see the set here, how they set it up. And this very much in many of the pictures you can see on the side there, the triangle shape, that's the flag of his son Bo, who died tragically, the war veteran. And so you can see all that set up. And so it's got a teleprompter. So, Biden tried his best to do it, but it wasn't working very well. And so we're going to get more to that in a few minutes. Let's continue on what's been going on. So Trump was talking, he was appearing, Biden was doing these virtual events but not doing very well. Then on May 26th, things changed dramatically and have continued to change since then as this piece. And this is the first piece that I saw. This is in the Washington Post the day after George Floyd was, the police officers put their knee on him and he died. 4 police officers are fired after they showed this. And so again, this is the first reporting of it. And what's interesting about it is the headline for this story is 4 police officers were fired Tuesday amid protest and outrage after the video showed them kneeling on the neck of a handcuffed black man. George, his name has not yet reached that level, and the officers were not identified. And there was some video that they showed, at least on the Washington Post, showing some of the protests to it, but it wasn't a page 1 story. It wasn't a major. It was just sort of like, in Minneapolis, this is happening. It's tragic. You might say it's one of many. Going back to Tamir Rice in Cleveland and Ferguson, Missouri, all of the things that have happened previously. Tragic stories of young African Americans and African Americans of all ages dying with police. So, but it wasn't there. But very quickly, of course, things ratcheted up. The protests continued. And you had President Trump deciding to take a tone of not trying to bring the country together, as many people wanted, for some consolation, trying to reconcile things, trying to tap things down. Instead, he is taking on this sort of law and order perspective. So during the coronavirus, during March, he called himself, this is a war against coronavirus. I'm the wartime president. These people are thugs, and they're dishonoring the memory of George Floyd. And he used this expression: when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And this really, really escalated things, because this is a phrase that goes back to the 1960s, used by a racist police chief in Florida and others. And all kinds of problems, all kinds of escalations. And this also led to, you may recall, Twitter saying to Trump that they're going to start to fact check him. They're going to start to put a label on his tweets that they are escalating violence, which goes against their terms of use. And the president threatened them, and it started to become a whole issue of First Amendment. That is sort of washed away. But for about a week, it was something that all of us were talking about. But this certainly didn't tap things down. And on June 1st, President Trump walked across Lafayette Park. The protesters were cleared just before he did this on live TV. And the White House has, you can easily see some of these timelines. Washington Post have done that a good job, and New York Times has done a good job of doing that. But it did, and this picture here from CNN really showed that this terrible split screen that I would say that for a normal president would just have been destructive to them, because the president's trying to talk, and then on the other side of the screen you see protesters, again, peaceful protesters, being pushed away and chemical gas used on them, and then the president walking. And I saw this and I was shocked too, and I've heard other commentators here, it just didn't seem dignified, that he shouldn't go past a graffiti where it says F Trump and all this. It didn't make sense to that. And then of course the photo op in front of St. John's Church that many people find problematic. He didn't offer a prayer, just wanted to stand there and be in front of that, causing more blowing up of things. Okay. Joe Biden. This is now the time that he is coming out. Okay, I have to show up. I have to be there. I can't just stay secluded in my basement anymore. I have to come out. And so he's taking a very different approach. So President Trump has moved from being the wartime president to being the law and order president, right? He's, these protests are wrong, these protests are destructive, these protests are harmful, and we're going to stop them. I'm going to send in the troops. I'm going to do that. Biden taking the role that President Trump has certainly eschewed for his entire presidency. He just doesn't feel comfortable being what we in political communication would call the consoler in chief. How do I console you? How do I make you feel better? How do I make the nation feel better when we go through a tragedy or some terrible time? Biden, clearly, this is a role that he feels comfortable with, and he is trying to, as it says in this headline, meet the moment, right? Trying to show this contrast with President Trump. And he went to this church and met with some different religious leaders, bowing his head, trying to show that differences that he has with President Trump. So a very different perspective. And of course, he's wearing a mask. President Trump has chosen not to wear a mask at all, never to show that in public, although he did say he was worn it during a visit to a particular factory. So let's just talk a little bit about what's going on here with the protests, right? So as of yesterday, New York Times reporting that the tens of thousands of people have been swarming the streets, and there's been lots of shooting, looting, vandalism, lots of protests, and they've been in at least 140 cities across the U.S. National Guard is activated in at least 21 states, and you can see this photo from May 28th in Minneapolis with the National Guard coming down the streets. And of course, there have also been protests around the world, in Australia, all over Europe, and the Pacific, Asia. So whatever is happening with George Floyd, whatever these protests are striking a chord with people, it really is something that seems to be different, right? Certainly, if we go back to Tamir Rice, or we go back to Ferguson, Missouri, go back to other examples of what have happened over the past few years. These were protests that were isolated in those cities. And there were some things, small things in other places, but certainly not going on for this amount of time and in all over the place. Yesterday was the funeral of George Floyd in Houston. The Reverend Al Sharpton was officiating, and this very remarkable moment happened, I thought, with the police officers there, because I think we have these calls for the systematic violence, systematic racism, the systematic problems of the police. And here we have this moment where these Houston police officers raise their hands in a salute as the coffin of George Floyd passed by them. You can see them saluting. I think that seemed to be an important moment to me. There were some headlines about that. And it turns into, as this headline shows, continue the quest for justice, keep going with what's happening. And the Reverend Sharpton had invited other families from other young and Black and African Americans who had died in police custody or by the police to be there too. So even though it was for George Floyd, it seemed to take on a larger significance in this funeral. There were during different rallies and different memorials that have been going on, Governor Abbott was there of Texas, the mayor was there, and Joe Biden spoke over a video recording. President Trump did not appear. President Trump did not send anyone, which I think for many people, was surprising, but not that surprising. Certainly in the past, President Obama was careful about not attending too many of these types of things, but he would often send Joe Biden, or he'd often send somebody from the cabinet or somebody as a representative of the White House to be there. So it wasn't that the president was there, but somebody was there to show that. President Trump did not tweet about it, did not speak about it. So again, it's just two very starkly different ways of doing it. And I think the question that political communication folks like myself are asking is, how does this matter? What does this mean? And yesterday there were two pieces, one in the New York Times, one in the Washington Post, about how the Black Lives Matter movement went mainstream. How did suddenly this Black Lives Matter movement, which seemed to be within primarily the African-American community, suddenly, and you can see here in these protests, suddenly people of all colors, white people, everybody is there at these rallies. How did this suddenly happen where everybody is part of it and everybody's talking about it? The director of the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center at Howard University is Justin Hansford, who was an activist at Ferguson in 2014. And he is quoted in this piece pointing out about Mitt Romney, who walked in this protest here. And And Mr. Hansford says it's something where the Mitt Romneys of the world can join in these protests. And that was something unimaginable in 2014, which is the result of 6 years of hard work by people in the movement and all the discussions that have been changing people's hearts and minds. So certainly, and again, Mitt Romney, the lone voice for impeachment in the Senate of the Republicans. Mitt Romney, certainly a thorn in President Trump's side, although certainly Democrats have argued that he just never has gone far enough, that why can't he do more? So we have Mitt Romney there, and certainly President Trump tweeted about Mitt Romney participating. Wasn't there. And the movement is really trying to move forward, according to this piece and others too, about trying to demand for defunding the police department, although that has become a very politically divisive point on what's going to happen to them. But what was interesting to me is the data. As a social scientist, I'm always interested in the data. And a Washington Post Char School poll that was released on Tuesday found 69% of Americans said the death of George Floyd reflect a broader problem in the way Black people are treated by the police. And compared to 2014, when Michael Brown died in Ferguson, only 43% believed that. So, so that's a huge increase. That's a tremendous increase. And as a social scientist, one of the things that we study about and sort of like tear the data apart and try and understand is how people are very much stuck in their opinions, right? If you look at opinions on death penalty, abortion, things of that, we have not changed as a nation in many, many decades, right? People are very split and they're stuck, right? You're not changing your mind. This is something people have changed their minds about. And so I think that is particularly interesting. And for me, as both a communication professor and a political communication scholar, I was really interested in how corporate America has suddenly become part of this. If any of you have Amazon Prime, if you've clicked on your Amazon Prime, opened it up lately, what you're going to see suddenly on the top is like, here are movies about African Americans and civil rights. Maybe you want to take a look at that. Suddenly that is there. That is given to her, right? Everybody is sort of like moving to this, right? Amazon has said the brutal treatment of Black people in our country must stop, which was quickly replied by the American Civil Liberties Union saying, cool tweet. Will you commit to stop selling facial recognition technology that supercharges police abuses? Because some of you may know, you may not know, right, that Amazon owns Ring, the Ring technology. So if you have a doorbell with those little cameras on it, that's Amazon. And that they've made, some of you may know this, some of you may not, deals with or contracts with police to use those to help with crime and law enforcement. But it also has facial recognition software that some people feel crosses the line. Complicated. Nike came out and said they put a little twist on their just do it, and they posted something, and I think it came with a little ad that said just don't do it, right, to the police, right? Don't do it. Don't treat African Americans like this, which that led to sort of a brushback of saying, hey, Nike, how many African Americans do you have in your executive suite, right? So different things, different problems. So different people, different companies are trying to grapple with that. I do a lot of cooking. I noticed that suddenly all of these King Arthur Flour and America's Test Kitchen, all these different baking, they're suddenly becoming, hey, we support these things. So that's different. That feels different to me. Whether that's going to stick or make a difference, I'm not sure, but I think that's something to consider. And certainly other things have been going on, again, that gives this a different feeling, right? The stock exchange. They held even a nearly 9-minute silence in honor of George Floyd on the day of his funeral. There's political changes going on. Mayor Turner in Houston announced that they're going to ban chokeholds and strangleholds, things that the police have been able to use to subdue criminals. Gone with the Wind, suddenly this morning was announced it's pulled from HBO Max, the new streaming service, because it just doesn't feel right to have a movie with that portrays happy slaves on a plantation. It just doesn't feel right to be, promoting that. Certainly, the Democrats in Congress, I don't have a slide for this, are trying to pass some new legislation. So all these things they're trying to do this, again, not with the White House being involved, not with anyone really from the GOP, except the Mitch McConnell announcing that the Republicans are going to try and do some type of reform there to try and meet what the Democrats are doing. So that other things have been going on. Cops, the show that's been on for decades, is canceled, right? Because it is shown as showing police brutality in a way that we don't want to see anymore. And the CrossFit CEO, one of many CEOs over the past Trump administration, 3.5 years, who made comments that have been seen as funny. he stepped down because he made inflammatory comments about Joe White, and contracts with CrossFit in different gyms were eliminated. So to me, I'm seeing things that feel different. I'm not a scholar in in Black studies, so I don't want to talk about that movement as such, but from political communication, from a communication standpoint, I'm seeing changes and things that we haven't seen before, which I think is different. So where are we now? How does this play into the 2020 election? So the coronavirus has certainly affected President Trump. Recent poll, here's a Fox News headline, poll puts Trump down 14 points to Biden. Here's a Fox poll done in Wisconsin. Certainly Wisconsin was one of those few states that helped President Trump win the election. And you can see there in that in October of 2019, the changes here, and how Joe Biden is now 49%, Trump 48% in January. It was only a 5-point margin between them. Now it is a 9-point margin. This has got to give pause to the White House. This has got to give pause to President Trump. Here's a piece from the New York Times from the Upshot, their strong analysis unit, that Joe Biden just seems to be in a very strong position, and that this is certainly posing a challenge to him. And just in terms of other things going on. And I just want to lay these out for you here. So where has he lost significant support? Because it's not just, you need to sort of look deeper into the data, and I think it's important, right? One is from white women. He's losing support from that. And that's something that, as a social scientist and political communication researcher, we always look at women as being an important vote. If you go back, you can think about soccer moms being important, and certainly health is an issue that women sort of stereotypically as the caregiver of the family, but health and health of the children is always something that women have been key on. So it's not surprising that women during a health scare like this and pandemic are losing faith in President Trump. But very surprisingly are white voters without a college degree. Why are they losing support for President Trump? One might argue certainly that with the unemployment rate going up, people losing their jobs from the quarantine, they are the people who maybe have blue-collar workers losing their jobs more, being laid off, going on unemployment. That's become a problem. And President Trump has been running ads. He's been running ads in Iowa. He's been running ads in Wisconsin, all states that he won by 10 points in 2016. Iowa, he shouldn't be running ads in Iowa, for Pete's sake. Iowa is strong GOP. That is a strong red state. So he's running ads there. He's been running ads in Ohio, right? Also, we are tilting red. Some say we've already tilted there. He's running ads here. And President Trump has been losing support among the elderly. And the elderly were one of his highest demographic support groups, and they've been particularly hard hit by COVID-19, certainly, and that has been a problem. So I have a link here for a really excellent analysis from our Eliason of NPR about what are being called guardian women who are sort of, they swing voters. Interesting piece there. It goes into more details about women to vote in this election. Again, it's early, but something to take a look at. And what happened very late today, certainly maybe came on your newsfeed or you got a notification on your phone. President Trump has been very angry about these polls, and he demanded that CNN apologize for this poll that showed that he was losing by 14 points. Now, what's interesting about the polls, and this is something you want to keep in mind as you listen to them and watch them, is who they are asking the question of. So certainly we can ask just general Americans who they're going to vote for, but then you have a problem because some people aren't registered to vote, some people aren't going to vote. And so generally, this is CNN poll conducted by SSRS, which is an excellent high quality research firm. They asked registered voters because we can get a list of those registered voters, and so we can get a random sample from them and get, so those are people who we know are registered. So, but later on, as the campaign goes on, we'll start wanting to get polling from likely voters. That's the word you want to look for, likely voters. So what does likely voters mean? It means people who are registered and who have voted in the past. And so that means that they will likely vote again. So you can be registered, maybe you're a first time register, maybe that, and you are, or maybe you've registered, but you haven't voted in a few years, also possible. And so that has been, but this 41% shows him losing badly, at least at this point, and his approval rating, which has been around 40 to 45% for the course of his presidency. He's really never gotten above that. No, he's never grown his base, which a lot of people are concerned about. Puts him on par with one-term presidents like Jimmy Carter and George Herbert Walker Bush, who Bill Clinton defeated. So this is not going to be good. And so he's saying, fake news, got to take it off. That's bad. So we'll see what happens with that. I can't imagine they will. Okay, let's get into some political advertising and talk about how they've been spending their money. So we're going to look at a little ad. So make sure, I think that you should be able to hear them, but check your own audio. Make sure if you hear me, you should be able to hear them. And so in May, in the middle of May, President Trump began a series of very hard-hitting ads, mostly on social media, attacking Biden. And so he was picking two lanes to choose for, right? One, I'm going to attack Biden on being old. Remember, he calls him Sleepy Joe, and the geriatric model, and also the model of being the puppet of China, because China is, our enemy, and China is a way we're gonna make him be soft on China and also show that he's old. So I would argue, certainly at this point in the campaign, it probably seems like these are things that they're testing, right? And campaigns test everything all the time. They test it with focus groups, but now with Facebook and social media, you can test things exactly and see how they are, see how people respond to them, and okay, China's not working. Focus more on geriatric, and there's a problem. And so, and there were research that really showed that that Biden, on this question of stamina and sharpness, Trump led Biden by a small number of percentage points. And when you watch these ads, they use a lot of meme type images. And so here's some images here. If you search easily found about, these are things you easily find on Facebook, right? Some goofy things here about poking fun at Joe Biden. And so let's take a look at this ad here. Hopefully, here we go. So this takes a moment, it's quiet for a moment, and then it will start to play.
I agree that everybody wants that. In fact, they should. Anyway, as we make clear to China, which I have done personally with the president of China. Maybe in the times I apologize for not remembering. Well, I'll tell you what. Well, anyway, you get the point.
Okay, so you can get the idea here, right? And of course, Biden is a couple of years older than Donald Trump. Is he have some mental acuity problems? I don't know. That would be something that we need to have some medical records produced for. But certainly, it's easy to find things where people forget a name or have some silly look on themselves. But certainly, in social media, these things fall into it. And I could talk about how they fit into what we might call the narrative, which is sort of a story that we have about a candidate, and we like to use that. And once that narrative is set, it's very hard to break that narrative. It's very, very difficult to do it. And so President Trump certainly is trying to appeal to his base and appeal to that small amount of swing voters, those 77,000 people who helped to really push the election over in 2016. But of course, President Trump is running some positive ads about himself too. This is a recent ad called Bull in a China Shop.
A bull in a China shop, changing Washington. It takes a Donald Trump to demand truth from China. Shut down foreign travel. Get ventilators and tests now. Raise unemployment benefits. Cash relief to families. Washington's come to that. President Trump's not always polite. Mr. Nice Guy won't cut it. He does it his way, not the Washington way. But Donald Trump gets it done.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
So Mr. Nice Guy won't get it done. Bull in a China shop. So appealing to that idea of the change agent, which is unusual because change agent is usually not what an incumbent runs on. Incumbent usually runs on, look what I've done, not, I change it up, because change can be dangerous or, confusing or, not be settled. So where's President Trump been on things with the protests and such? He really has not used that so far in terms of any ads, but of course things can change. I'm assuming that he's going to be using this photo op. I mean, so much time and effort was, well, maybe not time, but a lot of effort was put into making that happen with the police and the National Guard and the military who were clearing that and, making this point to go there. So I'm assuming we're going to see that at some point in an ad, but right now. But what's interesting is, so this is something all of you can do, and this is Facebook ad library. So if you Google Facebook ad library, what you can find is all the different ads that candidates have been running on Facebook. And then if you click a little deeper, you can find this page, and it's a little distorted because I have to fit it into the slide. but how much money they've spent on things. So over the course of from May to June, Donald Trump has spent $42 million on ads, but in the course of just 1 week, he's only spent $1 million. So not that much recently, and so, but how he's doing here in this time period. So I just want to point that out. So recently, during the George Floyd protest, not a lot. So we're going to contrast that with Vice President Biden in a moment. So here is where Donald Trump is. He's got a ton of money. So he's raised an unprecedented $742 million. That is a lot of money, which is, as you can see in the slide, $288 million more than Barack Obama had in his re-election campaign 8 years ago. And so the GOP, they have a lot of mobilized people, army of volunteers. And at this point, I'm trying to highlight for you here, the Trump campaign has more than 20 million voter contacts. What does that mean exactly? It means they have 20 million people that they know everything about you. They know how you voted. They know what things you like on Facebook. All of that digital information about you, they know. So that the word contact is such, makes it sound very simple. Oh, they have your contact number, they'll get you. But it means much more than that. So again, we can talk more about that. But they're getting ready. Early this week, Politico reported they're getting ready, and they're going to focus on the 3 things that they have worked in the past, and why not work with them again? Crime. Certainly, we talked about the caravan, migrants, all of that. Gangs from Mexico, all that will probably come back and be seen again. China, obviously, we started out as a much more friendly situation with President Xi, certainly this trade war, all that. Immigration, let's come back to that again. So all those were successful. And this idea of defunding the police, whatever that means exactly, how that would be, how that would work, that certainly seems like it would be prominent in their campaign. Again, testing messages out at this point. We'll see what they do. Here is some memes about this that you might see on Facebook. Democrats defund, President Trump defends. Is this students for Trump? Did someone make this up? I don't know. It's social media. You can't trust anything. And part of it has to do with the nostalgia campaign, right? And in the Politico piece, it says, look for the return to this that fits in with the nostalgia campaign, right? And this idea that, America, make America great again, make America great. What we had back in the 1950s and this previous time period, that's what we want to return to. And certainly that will be appealing, just like it was in 2016. It's kind of a repeat. Not what most typical incumbents do. Incumbents need to come up with something different, right? President Clinton was going to help me complete the bridge to the 21st century, right? Ronald Reagan, it's morning again in America. Things are good. Let's continue that. Everyone usually says it's good. Let's continue, not let's repeat that whole campaign all over again. So it's going to be interesting to see if that happens. Okay, what is Biden doing? As I mentioned before, his campaign did not impress many people when he was laying low in his house. Here's a clever headline I thought in the New York Times. His online campaign is still loading, right? Right. Is full of virtual rallies, glitches, and birds. In lieu of time. This is a really interesting piece that he had where he was wearing a mask to start off with, and then what happens is it's awfully distracting. And you can hear birds in the background. You can hear a train whistle in the background. It just did not seem like it was, buttoned up, not as professional as it should be. So certainly that was problematic. And President Trump started to go out. This is that famous visit in Arizona to the mask factory where President Trump, didn't want to wear a mask. Other pictures of that. But other people were saying just, hey, Joe, you got to get out of it. Chris Wallace of Fox, you got to get out. This is not a good look for you. Like this is a problem. And so with the George Floyd protest, we showed the slide a little while ago, right? He's coming out, trying to meet the moment, trying to be the consoler in chief. And very quickly, the Biden campaign said, boom, we're going to use this moment. We're going to start spending on Facebook ads and move them into the battleground states, right? This is Arizona, Florida, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, focusing on the young. Because if you remember, during the primaries, young people supported Bernie. Older people supported Biden. So Biden really needs to shore up that support of that. And so, who knows? You can't say that they're going to come out and vote for him. And here is an ad, recently ad that came out on progress using a speech that he made a week ago about,
You know, the history of this nation teaches us that in some of our darkest moments of despair, we've made some of our greatest progress. The 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments followed the Civil War. The greatest economic growth in world history grew out of the Great Depression. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 65 came in the tracks of Bull Connor's vicious dogs. To paraphrase Reverend Barber, it's in the morning where we find hope. But it's going to take more than talk. We've had talk before. We've had protests before. We've got to now vow to make this at least an era of action and reverse the systemic racism with a long overdue concrete change.
Okay, so you can, I'm going to stop here just for time purposes. So you can sort of see what Biden is trying to do. He's trying to appeal to young people. He's trying to say, look, this is the past. It was bad, really bad. Change came. This is the current, this is the present. Bad, but we're going to make change. We can make change. This is the time we're going to make change. And of course, the future with him as president. And so now, very quickly in this past couple of weeks, Biden campaign is outspending Trump on these Facebook ads. And this is, of course, where the campaign is, right? The campaign is living on social media. The campaign is not your TV campaign, although some of it, all on social media. That's where it is going to become. And he spent $1.6 million on Facebook last week. Just a ton of money, pouring in tons of ads, more than they spent on their whole candidacy. And here's that same page from the ad library. You can see in the past 7 days, Biden spent $5 million in the past month, but in the past month, only $21 million. So even though altogether, President Trump spent more, 2 times as much, and it's still very early in the campaign, it's still a big shift, at least in this period. So it's something that, you know, White House, Trump campaign saying, we got to think this through. Let's not rush to anything. Biden saying, let's take advantage, move forward. Let's do this. But I want to show you some other ads that are happening right now. So every campaign, of course, has super PACs related to them. These are political action committees that help to raise money. How they get that money, how this is legal to do, that's a discussion for a separate time. I'm happy to answer those questions. And America's First Action, great name, America First and Action. They've been running some interesting ads in favor of, I think you can figure out for whom.
160,000 jobs lost. It's not a statistic. It's 160,000 sleepless nights and hard conversations because Joe Biden supported the NAFTA deal he said wouldn't send our jobs to Mexico and backed bad trade deals with China that shipped our jobs overseas. It's 160,000 reasons Joe Biden shouldn't be president. America First Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Again, if you're not familiar with America First Action, you might not know who they're, they're just sort of no, they're President Trump's super PAC. They don't have to say that. One more, this is a weird one, so I want to show you this.
在华府半个世纪期间，拜登对中国表现出色。年复一年，拜登支持了伟大的扼杀就业的贸易协议。拜登仍然以某种方式给了我们交易通行证。
They're not bad folks.
当我们10几万个工作离开了宾夕法尼亚州的时候，拜登为中国干杯。拜登是我们在华府47年的人。拜登是我们在华府半个世纪的人。America First Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So really funny, weird ad, all in Chinese. Again, trying to play, Vice President Biden soft on China. What's going to happen there? Another group come out made up of the Never Trumpers. So this is Kellyanne Conway's husband, George Conway, other prominent folks in the conservative community who have come out against President Trump, and they've recently come out with an ad that's called Morning in America, MOUR, as in death, playing off of the famous ad from Ronald Reagan. So let me just show you a minute of the famous ad from Ronald Reagan, and then we'll switch over to that. I'm sure most of you may be familiar with the Morning in America ad. Good morning, that very upbeat President Reagan in 1984 running for re-election.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better.
So that's the actual name of the ad, Prouder, Stronger, Better. But of course, I could watch that ad a million times a day. It's uplifting. The music, the lighting, I can give you about a 10-minute, 15-minute discourse on what makes that ad work. And here's what the Lincoln Project came up with recently.
There's morning in America. Today, more than 60,000 Americans have died from a deadly virus Donald Trump ignored. With the economy in shambles, more than 26 million Americans are out of work, the worst economy in decades. Trump bailed out Wall Street, but not Main Street. This afternoon, millions of Americans will apply for unemployment. And with their savings run out, many are giving up hope. Millions worry that a loved one won't survive COVID-19. There's mourning in America.
Okay, so you get this idea here, Morning America. I know we're almost at 8. Hang on with me. We're going to go a little bit over, and then we'll definitely have time for questions. So, but you can sort of see those ads, what's going on here. So ads, you know, from other people going on. So you're going to see more and more of these as the campaign goes on. All right, I'm going to try to touch on a few other topics. I'm just going to move through those. So, question: does the vice president matter? I would answer. You could ask John Kennedy when he's the Democratic leader of the Senate, who was seen as a master senator, person who knew how to get legislation done. Johnson wasn't sure it was the right choice to do, but it was a bold move and certainly made a difference, helped keep the southern part of the Democrats together, and that really helped to make a difference in that election. You could also ask John McCain if Sarah Palin was the right choice for him. So you could certainly say that she added a lot of things to his campaign. I'm not sure all of them are necessarily positive, but certainly she was a personality and certainly changed the status of the campaign. But did people make their vote based on Sarah Palin as the vice president? I'm not sure. And who should Vice President Biden pick? This is something that we need to see and need to think about. Some people have argued, obviously, it should be Elizabeth Warren. She's the best. She would bring a political upside. Although what I would say, and many others, political strategists I've heard talk about, is that certainly that would kill a lot of donations, because certainly she's been hard on Wall Street, and that might be problematic. Other people have said Kamala Harris. She obviously should be on the short list. Biden said that he would pick a woman, so that is somebody. And why not Kamala Harris? She was doing fairly well in the campaign. Maybe she would be the right person. But what's going on with Minneapolis is really shaking things up. And some of these candidates who have a law and order background, Amy Klobuchar, a prosecutor in Minnesota, Kamala Harris, a prosecutor in California, all of these things are starting to become problematic for them. Amy Klobuchar, I believe I've heard, has been written off. There's no way that she could do it based on some of the things that she prosecuted in there. Kamala Harris, I'm not sure. But the people who are rising are these two people. So here, standing with Adam Schiff and the other impeachment managers here is Congresswoman Val Demings of Florida. She was one of the impeachment managers. She's from Florida. She was seen as a rising star, and so they put her on. They also wanted to put a woman of color onto as an impeachment manager. And so she got a lot of national exposure from that. A lot of people liked her. She has a little background problem as being a police chief. I believe it was in Orlando, so that could be a problem. So she's sort of on the fence. And one person who's really come out a lot is Keisha Lance Bottoms. She is the mayor of Atlanta. She has spoken forcefully during the protests. She has started to become someone that people are banding around. Stacey Abrams is another person some of you may have heard of. She's never held political office, so many people thought she'd be unqualified, but certainly she has been advocated for. Many people have. Let's go to another quick topic. Will these protests help Donald Trump as they did Richard Nixon in 1968? So many people are drawing these comparisons. Immediately, I thought of it as well to the 68 campaign. So this was the campaign when the Democrats kind of imploded. There were protests in Chicago. The police officers beat up people in the streets outside the convention as Hubert Humphrey was nominated. There were protests on the street for civil rights, for Vietnam, crazy crazy year, and history seems to suggest that that these did help the violent protests helped the Republicans, right? Because Republicans are seen as a law and order, and that's what Nixon and Agnew ran on as law and order. And there's some research that suggests that Democrats are helped when the protests are peaceful. Republicans are helped when they are violent. And even just 2 or 3% of margin, that can many times make a difference. And whether a law and order message can help Trump to win re-election, it's going to be interesting to see. It certainly would help the people who want things to be stable, right? President Trump will get things back to normal. That could be good. It also helps the folks get away from the coronavirus, right? Let's not talk about coronavirus and how things really went bad. 100,000 people died. Let's talk about that. But it's also hard, as I've been saying, for the president to say, I'm going to make change when these things happened under my watch. That's where it gets very difficult. Let's go to another quick question. Does the location of the presidential nominating convention matter? So all the conventions were put on hold during the coronavirus. We can't have the convention. Everybody said Democrats were supposed to go to Milwaukee. Hey, anybody know why they're going to Milwaukee? I hear you. That's right, because Wisconsin was one of the states that President Trump won by just a little bit and helped him to an election. The Democrats thought, let's go to Milwaukee, to energize the Democrats there. Will help get back Wisconsin into a blue state. But whether they're going to meet there or not, still undetermined. Republicans, though, have been in a fight. So President Trump has going to be, the Republican contest was supposed to be in North Carolina. But there is a Democratic governor in North Carolina who said, look, I can't maybe have the convention. You can have the convention, but with social distancing, you cannot have a packed arena. And President Trump said, absolutely not. I must have a packed arena. I need to have a giant crowd there to cheer me on as I'm renominated for my party. And that has become a problem. And now they're looking to move to Jacksonville. So for the contract, they would do much of the smaller things in North Carolina, but Florida, interesting, a swing state, also try and get people there. That might happen there. So whether that makes a difference, we're going to have to see how that is. Hey, here's another fun question. What's going to happen with the culture wars? Certainly, we could argue that we've already been in some type of a culture war, right? And by culture war, we're talking about issues that are not legislative, but issues that are in society, right? These are things like, should you be allowed to say Merry Christmas or should you say Happy Holidays, right? President Trump was very adamant about that when I'm president, we should be able to say Merry Christmas. No one's going to tell you can't say that. That's part of what we call the culture wars. And certainly opening businesses has moved from being something that's been for health and safety to some of the culture wars. Mask, wearing a mask itself has been part of the culture wars. And just this past week, we're now revisiting again Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, the NFL. All of this is happening. Will the culture wars play into the 2020 election? I will say absolutely. I don't know what issues it will be, but I'm sure that will happen and continue. So that will be something to galvanize people, get people riled up as well. When the issues are just too complicated, I can vote based on culture wars. Quickly, can Biden expand the map? Here's a question that people like me love to sort of get into. Here is I love this graphic when I found it. Here are the 4 states. We got Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, Pennsylvania. That's the election, folks. Don't care about the rest. California, we know you're going blue. New York, we know you're going red. Texas, we know you're going red, right? We know most of the states, right? It just goes down, right? It's not a national election. And despite what President Trump has argued, it doesn't matter if you win more than 300 electoral votes or how many you get. You don't get more power. You win by that. And it's really important to think about how someone like Barack Obama, he did not want to go for Georgia, even though Georgia was changing. Georgia was starting to become a swing state, possibly. Didn't think of that for his committee. He picked Colorado. He picked Virginia. Let's go for the states where I can get that number of 270. How can I put that together? And people like myself and others have argued that how did President Trump win? He pretty much pulled a straight flush, right? He just, all the pieces just fell just by some luck, a few percentage points here, a few percentage points here in these 4 states, and he won. Hillary Clinton tried to do this math. She focused on Florida, she focused on Ohio, but she obviously had less success. Never went to Wisconsin, of course. Problematic. Okay, what else is going to happen? Should we all worry about hacking and Russian, Chinese, Iranian mischief? Of course, we should worry because it's already happened, right? These are stories not of the past few weeks, but before that, that Russia was interfering in the Biden primary, trying to get Biden to become the nominee, that was seen as, right, still involved. And Chinese hackers targeting the email accounts of the Biden staff already. So all these things are happening again. Will we know about it? Will the government tell us? I don't know, but certainly that's something to think about. And of course, this battlefield is online, right? That social media is where this war is happening. Terrorists use it. President uses Twitter. Pop stars use Twitter. All of these things are affecting politics, and they're affecting the election in ways that we're just as social scientists trying to understand. But this is really where it's going to be happening. And social media, where will they come out in terms of monitoring things carefully and safely? How will they do it? You have something like this that appeared during the 2016 campaign. Satan, if I win, Clinton wins. Jesus, not if I can help it, right? These kind of weird things, many of them put out by the Russians that we know, right, to help influence us and just try and sow discord. How will this affect things? Now I want to close here. Thank you for staying with me on the nightmare scenario. So what could possibly happen? What are people like myself thinking about? What are we worried about? And it may not be what you're going to be expecting. So here is my story. And this is, Politico had a very similar piece about this, so some of it is taken from there. I hear a lot of rain, so please bear with me. Large numbers of voters in November become disenfranchised because they're worried because of the pandemic, perhaps because of a second wave, that voting is not safe and that they're going to catch the coronavirus if they go to vote, right? We saw in Wisconsin, many people, not many, some people came down with coronavirus after going to vote. How's that all going to work? Next, so instead, people are demanding absentee ballots. That is overwhelming the election administrators who haven't printed up enough ballots. Ohio, many of you may have seen, right? In the state legislature, Republicans have just put through legislation that where they will no longer automatically send you a letter saying that you can vote by mail. You have to sort of apply for that. So it doesn't make it as easy anymore. So with someone without enough absentee ballots, how are they going to suddenly get these to people in time? It's going to be problematic. And then in some states, fear of that isn't a valid request for an absentee ballot. So if people can't get an absentee ballot for any good reason, then turnout is going to drop because people are going to be afraid, right? So turnout dropping, who knows how that will affect things. And then the people who are voting by mail all the time, that's going to just overwhelm things there in each state. And what happened in the Wisconsin primary back in April is that you can't get the results on election night because they're still counting those absentee ballots that came in. And the states, of course, and the cities where so many absentee ballots, the biggest cities, they're in blue states, Democratic cities that are the slowest to count, and the results aren't coming in. So you're going to bed at midnight on election night, and we don't have results from Detroit. We don't have results from Philadelphia. We don't have results from, Los Angeles. We don't have results from New York City. Wherever, we don't have results. So now we got to wait till morning or a few days later. Nobody likes that. So what might happen? President Trump might declare victory, saying that those absentee ballots are frauds, they're fake, you can't trust them, they're not good. I declare victory based on what's come in tonight. I am the winner, and so I declare victory. But days later, Joe Biden, he's declared the victory because those absentee ballots are finally counted, and he's declared victory. So one person says, I'm the winner, the other person says, I'm the winner, and Americans are losing faith in our system and what to do. Naturally, what happens, it becomes contested and eventually goes to the Supreme Court, where, like Bush v. Gore, perhaps the judges will vote along, quote, party lines, because we know in Bush v. Gore, the judges appointed by Republican presidents voted in favor of Bush. The judges appointed by the Democratic presidents voted for Gore, and Trump wins the election. Or they say Biden wins the election, but Trump refuses to accept the ruling, and who knows what. So see you in November, folks. This is a crazy situation, and that's my worst case scenario, right? That's the fear. That's what people. There are other fears too. Other fears about not an election not even happening. I could talk about that, of course, as well. But I think when we think about elections and what's going to happen, it is early, but there's a lot of worry, a lot of things that could be done to fix things, and lots of ads to watch. Lots and lots of stuff. So things are never as simple as they are in the previous election, and hopefully it'll all work. So as I always say to my students on election day, vote early and vote often. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's see. We've got a few questions here, folks. If you want to get yours in, we still have a little bit of time, so use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. The first one is, after 2016, we learned that the polling was, quote, off. What has changed, if anything? How much of the polling should we believe?
Right. So I think what's interesting about that is that I talk a lot about narratives, right? So there is an idea that the polling was off, when in fact, after what researchers like myself, as we sort of dug into things, right, most of the polling said that Hillary Clinton would win the election. And those were based on sort of generally we take all different polls and they put them together and try and come up with an average for the polls. And those polls are national polls. And the national polls said that when we put those all together, that Hillary Clinton had more support and she would win. And in fact, when we look at the number of people who voted, Hillary Clinton won the majority of people in America. She won by about 3% of the vote, which is not a lot, but she did win the popular vote. And President Trump won the Electoral College with, as I call it, this straight flush. So my suggestion to all of you is, when you look at the polls, be careful about looking at national polls, right? And I think that's what's this problem of this one that President Trump is upset about, right? Yes, it's a national poll, but does that really mean anything? No, because it's not a national election. So I take those polls with a grain of salt. And what I always say, look more in the details, right? So what didn't change in the polls was that in 2016, the typical Republican voter voted for Trump. It wasn't the working class, the blue collar worker. That, although they were, that person didn't push President Trump. What pushed President Trump into winning was typical Republican supporters, such as the older folks and the rich folks, people like that. Those are typical types of things. So stay with the polls, but just look for more state polls. Look for the polls in your own state. See if you can find them. Try not to give so much to that, and look for that word, likely voters. Don't look for just sort of general. There are many people who do polls. Not all of them are good. What else you got, Anthony?
Mandy wants to know, how much do you think gerrymandering might impact election results?
Thanks, Mandy. Thanks for sticking around for this great question. So gerrymandering is the word we use for how the state legislatures, that happens every 10 years after the census, divide up each state into different districts where there are generally safe seats for Republicans and safe seats for Democrats, which helps to consolidate that majority. So I think that really makes a difference in how state legislatures and how, as the Republicans have gained more control of state legislatures over the past couple of decades, they've helped to consolidate their power. It doesn't make that much of a difference in terms of the presidential election, since that pulls together the whole state's vote, but it certainly makes a difference for representatives in Congress, and it keeps people. What it does, Mandy, is it leads to the extreme, because what happens is, and you see this now in Congress right now, is that, so you have a district that you know is a safe district for a Republican. So that Republican has to be very careful on how they vote, because if they move a little bit to the left, if they want to try and become more of a moderate, they're going to have a challenger in that district who is much more of a hardcore Trump supporter, perhaps, and they'll have a primary against them, and there's enough Republicans in there who could turn against them. So that forces them, quote unquote, forces them to kind of stay in that lane and not wanting to work across the aisle with Democrats, things that have been done more traditionally in the past when there was less gerrymandering. So good question.
Bernadette wants to know if you can draw any early conclusions by what happened recently in Georgia and Iowa voting. I'm guessing that's probably this yesterday with Georgia, and then King being swept out in the Republican primary in Iowa.
Right. So I think Democrats were. I mean, I think most human beings were pleased to see Representative King lose his seat. Kind of many of the despicable things that he has said over the years. The Democrats were kind of keeping their chops wet because they wanted to go against Steve King in the election. They were hoping they would win that seat, but now they probably will not win that seat. So I think that's sort of an outlier for how things are going. Georgia, I was working on my presentation today. I didn't follow everything, but I know headlines that I saw last night was that it was a mess, that people were having problems with voting and things. And I think that's when I talk about that nightmare scenario. I think what we saw in Wisconsin, I think what we saw last night in Georgia, I think these are the worries. Things are just not going to go smoothly. And again, these are people voting, in June. So turnout is low. So you can imagine, Bernadette, how many more people are going to be turning out in November, and how all these little problems are going to be happening. The problem with these voting machines is very, very serious. When you have states that are using new voting machines for the first time, people are not trained on how to fix them, on how to work with them. If they break and there are lines backed up, people have to go to court on those days to ask that the polling places stay open. I don't think I want to stay out until 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night waiting to vote. People are not going to want to do that. So I think it just puts a lot of fear into people's minds on what is going to be happening for November. So I'm kind of scared. Okay, what else?
We got room for a couple more. So if you have one, type it in here. Mandy wants to know, do you think the Senate will flip in the 2020 election?
Mandy, when I started working on this presentation, one of the things that I sort of put on the side was that I can talk about this, and then, I'll probably have some time to talk about how the Senate is going to play out. Right, because there are a lot of interesting Senate races going on in the country right now. And I think what's going to happen is usually how do I put it? So I think there's two things going on with this election, Mandy. One is, there's two ways to sort of look at it. One is a choice election, right? Am I making a rational choice between two candidates? Do I want Biden? Do I want Trump? Or is it an intensity election, right? Which candidate is going to have enough intensity to gather their supporters around? And what generally happens is, if you remember from voting, that the ballot works, right, where the president's on the top and then the down ballot races go down, right? So it starts with the president, then the ones for Senate and Congress, and then, governor and mayor, et cetera, down. So you get to your ballot issues. And what often tends to happen in kind of a sweeping election, if that is happening, and it can be for either party, is that if the polls continue to show, if things are going poorly for President Trump, then people are going to feel angry. If it's an intensity election, they're going to feel angry at President Trump, and they're going to likely to push that anger towards their senator. And that could be problematic for a lot of senators in close races. So I think there's probably a chance that the Democrats could take it over. I know they are chomping at the bit to do that, but I'm not sure that is going to happen because it's not a national, it's in these individual state races. So Mitch McConnell disliked very much in Kentucky, a close race there. But he tends to win over and over again, even though he's popular from the whole party, not popular in his own state. And there's some other interesting races as well. So I think I think it's something to watch. So and again, as I said earlier on, lots of time before things are going to be set. We'll see how things go after Labor Day, when things really start to pick up. Any other questions?
What impact do you think, if any, that the Lincoln Project will have on the race?
Oh, the Lincoln Project. The Lincoln Project sort of falls into that category of what happened, of how the reactions were over the past week when you had former Secretary of His Defense Jim Mattis speak out against the president, right, in the Atlantic magazine, saying, I think, what's been going on is terrible. This is really bad. And then the president quickly tweeted something about that, and their answer was it's his opinion. And also you saw Senator Murkowski from Alaska, right, where she spoke out and said, I'm just struggling with all this, for the first time. And, okay, that's her opinion. I think if you saw some of the news yesterday, when many pundits were very upset about President Trump sort of talking about this conspiracy theory coming from the One News Network, about the protester in Buffalo who got the 75-year-old man who was hit by the police, and sort of talking about maybe he's, Antifa, some sort of weird thing. And if you saw some of that news coverage last night where they were asking specifically to all the senators, and all these Republican senators, they do not want to challenge President Trump on these things. So, so I think it is, we could say it's a problem, but they want to be very, very careful in how they respond to all this.
Very good. And one last question. The president has said he's going to campaign in Oklahoma, doing a rally this week.
Right.
But the Biden campaign continues to say that they will probably not do any large rallies or convention. What impact will this have on the race?
That's a really good question. I think President Trump is anxious to get out. He loves his rallies. He finds them he feeds off that energy from his base that turn out there. And what's very, very important to remember, at least as we get closer to the election, is that turnout at rallies is not necessarily indicative of support going to the polls, right? There's always supporters who are going to show up at rallies. It doesn't necessarily mean that support is wider than that, and you're going to get a lot of people voting. But I think Biden is really in a box. He likes to give people hugs. He likes to touch people. He really is good at connecting with people. That's his strong suit. And then when people saw him in his basement just trying to do these virtual campaigns, it was very, very bad. So I think the whole race, really, everyone has these giant question marks around it. How is it going to be panning out if candidates just from all stripes, Republicans, Democrats, congresspersons, city council people, if they can't go out and knock on doors, I mean, I'm not sure. Are people going to be willing to open doors and talk to candidates or, pick up material that's left at their door? How is that all going to work? A lot of that get out the vote, all those things. If none of that is happening, it's going to be hard. And that's why when I talk about choice versus intensity, that enthusiasm about an election is something that's generally driven through in-person activity, right? People are coming to the polls. One of the great things, there's a book, there's many books on it, but how the Obama campaign challenge the system was that they came up with all these ideas on how they were going to actually get people to the polls. And so they would come to people's houses like numerous times saying, hey, do you have a plan to vote? What are you going to do? How are you getting to the polls? What time are you going to vote? What are you really planning? Trying to get people to put that plan in action. So I think all those things are there. President Trump is going to get tons of media coverage from these rallies, which will be good for his base. That will resonate. He will feel happy. He will feel stronger. So all that can be good. But, if the Democrats can't do it either, if they can't have that, convention where all the people are there, there is that convention bump that most candidates get for a week right afterwards. So that's going to be trouble. So the question is, how do we see these candidates? Are people just, are the Democrats just fed up with President Trump enough, or the Trump supporters just dislike Biden so much, love President Trump, they're all going to show up to the polls anyway? I have a hard time saying that that's going to happen without these normal interventions. Although we're doing things on Zoom, anything can happen. So if I give a talk in October, I might change my mind. So you can quote me on that.
Wonderful. Well, I want to take this opportunity, Ed, as I'm watching lightning in the background of your window, to wrap it up before we all lose our power.
Okay.
But one, thank all of our participants for being with us this evening. And secondly, thank you so very much for another outstanding presentation.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Everyone have a good evening. Thank you, Anthony, for moderating it.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Everyone stay safe.